All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going way back, back to the 80s. We're talking about the Radio Shack color computer, the Kokuki, and we're diving deep, really deep into a piece of software, the Micro Works Editor.
Oh, the Micro Works Editor, a classic.
It is, and we've got something really special to help us out today.
Yeah.
We've got a brand new, super in-depth disassembly, and I mean, this thing gets into the nitty-gritty.
That's amazing. The Micro Works Editor, it was such a great tool, but a lot of that old software, the original code, it's just gone.
Vanished into the digital ether.
Exactly. So having a disassembly like this is like finding a treasure map. We can finally see how it all worked, all the clever tricks and techniques they used back then.
And that's what we're going to do today, right? We're going to crack this code open, figure out how it ticked, and who knows, maybe even find some inspiration for new stuff today.
Totally agree. I think there's a lot we can learn from the past. Back then, programmers had to work with so much less memory, less processing power. But they still managed to create some really incredible stuff.
They were like coding wizards, squeezing every last bit of performance out of those machines.
They really were. And you know what else I love about this? The person who did this disassembly, you can tell how passionate they are about the Coco and the Micro Works Editor. They poured so much time and energy into this, meticulously going through the code, figuring it all out.
A true labor of love.
Absolutely. And that comes across in the way they wrote it up. You can feel their excitement, their appreciation for this piece of software history.
I was particularly touched by the acknowledgments. They thanked their wife for her patience and understanding while they were working on this. And they even thanked, well, a higher power for enabling them to complete it.
That's beautiful. It really speaks to how personal this project was for them, how much it meant to them.
Okay, so let's get to the MicroWorks editor itself. Remind us, for those who weren't around back in the day, what was so special about this software? What made it stand out?
So the Micro Works Editor, it came out in 1982. And right away, it was a huge leap forward from what Coco users had before. For starters, it was disk-based.
Ah, that was a big deal, right? No more fiddling with those clunky ROM cartridges.
Exactly. It meant the editor wasn't limited by the tiny amount of storage you had on a ROM. It could be much bigger, much more powerful. And it was resident, which meant it stayed loaded in memory while you were working.
Much faster and smoother.
So much faster. And the other big thing, it had a macro assembler built right in.
Macro assembler, for the non-programmers in the audience, what does that mean in practice?
Well, it meant that you could define these little chunks of code, these macros, and then use them over and over again without having to type out the whole thing every time. It was a huge time saver. And it made your code more readable and easier to maintain.
So it wasn't just about being on disk. The MicroWorks editor had some genuinely groundbreaking features like full screen editing. No more of those pesky line numbers getting in the way.
Oh, yeah, the line numbers. Every line of code had to have a number, and you had to jump around and edit those numbers. It was a nightmare. With full screen editing, you could just see your code, all of it, on the screen at once. And you could move the cursor around, insert text, delete text, just like you would with a modern text editor.
And it worked with regular basic ASCII files, too.
Which made it super versatile. You could use it for editing assembly language programs, but also for writing basic programs, or even just plain text documents.
So it was a pretty sophisticated piece of software for its time. And as we mentioned, the person who did this disassembly went to great lengths to make it accurate. They reassembled their code and compared it byte for byte to the original binary.
That's impressive. And it gives us a lot of confidence that what we're looking at here is an accurate representation of the original code.
They also lay out some clear guidelines on how they did the disassembly, how they labeled things, and what conventions they used. For example, they used R, followed by a number for RAM locations, standard labels for the Coco's built-in ROM routines based on the Tandy documentation, and then drew on resources like Spectral Associates Unraveled series and even IE standards for everything else.
Those conventions make it a lot easier to follow along. And they mention that the editor typically loads into memory at address 0s and $.
Right. And they use the AND symbols to indicate different addressing modes, which is standard practice in 6809 assembly language.
All of those details are super important if you really want to dive into the code and understand how it works.
Okay, so let's get under the hood. What's the overall architecture of the MicroWorks editor? How is it structured?
Well, it's actually not just one big program. It's a combination of a basic loader and a machine language program. The basic loader is called EDBS, and the machine language program is 80% BNN.
So two parts working together. Why that approach?
Well, BASIC was relatively easy for people to understand and work with, so it was a good choice for the loader, which basically just sets things up and gets the machine language program running. But the actual editing and assembly, that was done in machine language, which was much more efficient and gave the programmers more direct control over the hardware.
And that machine language part is further divided into three separate programs, right? Load, edit, and write.
Exactly. And the basic loader, it acts like a conductor, deciding when to call which of these machine language programs.
So it's like a little state machine.
It is. It keeps track of what's going on, manages the disk drive, handles some basic user input, and then calls the appropriate machine language program when it's needed. And the way they did that was really clever, using what are called vectors. These are just memory locations that hold the starting address of each of those machine language programs. So, for example, the edit program starts at memory address, serial views in dollars. The load D program starts at serial v3, and the write program starts at serial $6.
Okay, so the basic loader knows where to find each of those programs. Let's break down the basic loader first. Our source material says it has 6 main sections.
Right. The first section is all about getting the system ready. It makes sure the disk drive is set to verify writes, which is important for preventing data corruption. And it reserves the necessary memory for the machine language code.
Setting the stage.
Exactly. Then, section 2 is a really cool feature, a re-entry point.
A re-entry point? What's that for?
So imagine you're working on something and there's a problem, like a disk error.
Or maybe the cat walks across the keyboard.
Yeah, maybe. Or the user accidentally exits the editor. This re-entry point allows the program to jump back to a safe spot, hopefully preventing you from losing all your work.
That's pretty smart, especially back then when crashes were more common.
For sure. Section 3 is where things really start happening. This is editor initialization.
So this is where the magic begins.
You could say that. The basic loader clears the screen, displays the Micro Works Editor welcome message, and sets up these important pointers in memory that the machine language programs are going to use. This is also where the edbcentbn machine language code gets loaded from disk into memory, and it figures out the boundaries of the available RAM. BRAM, which is the start of the free RAM, at $TXTPL, the initial address where we'll put loaded text, at 1B02, and then INDIRAM, which marks the very end of usable RAM, at a B044.
Okay, it's marking its territory, staking out its workspace.
Exactly. Section 4 is all about getting the user into the action, launching the editor.
This is where we finally get to type something.
That's right. It prompts the user to enter a file name if they want to edit an existing file, or it might show a directory listing of the files on the disk. If the user types in a file name, it opens that file and loads it into memory using the load program. If they don't, it skips the file stuff and jumps right into the editor by calling the edit machine language program.
Makes sense. Section 5 is called post-edit response. So this is after you've made some changes to your document.
Right. So you're done editing, and the edit program hands control back to the basic loader. The basic loader then asks the user what they want to do next.
Like save their changes, quit, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Options like done, which means save the changes, and exit, append, which means add another file to the end of this one, or write, which saves the file, maybe with a new name. Depending on what the user chooses, the basic loader will either call the write or load machine language program, or just jump back to the edit program if you want to keep working.
And finally, section 6 is about the basic loader reserving 3 graphic pages in memory. Now, why is it doing that?
Good question. This has to do with making sure there's enough contiguous memory for the ed%bond file, that's the machine language part of the editor, to load properly. It needs a decent chunk of RAM for its code and data. By reserving those 3 graphic pages, which are basically blocks of memory originally intended for graphics, of course, the basic loader guarantees that there's enough space.
So it's being a good memory citizen.
It is. Interestingly, the author of the disassembly thinks this might also be a clever way to work around a bug in the Coco's basic interpreter, how it manages memory. Once it's reserved that space, the basic code then jumps back to the beginning of the basic loader to properly initialize everything, but now with that memory safely set aside.
It was all coming together now. Let's dig into those machine language programs, starting with the load program. What does it do?
Well, the name kind of gives it away, right? Its job is to load text from a disk file. The basic loader has already located and opened the file, and the load program then grabs the data from that file and starts storing it in the Coco's memory. It starts at the address pointed to by TXTPLO and keeps going until it gets within about 320 bytes of the end of available RAM and GRAM.
Okay, so it's reading the data from the disk and putting it into RAM, but there's a bit more to it than that, isn't there?
You're right. As it's reading the text from the disk, it also converts each character into the Coco's screen character encoding. This is necessary because the editor, when it displays and manipulates text, works with these special screen characters.
Got it. So after it loads the whole file, what happens?
Well, it updates the txtplo pointer to point to the last memory location where it stored text, so it knows where the loaded text ends. Then it closes the file and passes control back to the basic loader.
And now we come to the write program. I'm guessing it does the opposite of the load program.
You got it. The write program takes the text that's currently in the editor's memory, specifically the data from bgram, the start of free RAM, to txtplo, the end of the text, and writes it to a disk file that's already been opened by the basic loader.
Okay, so it takes the text from memory and saves it to disk. Is there any character conversion going on here, like with the load program?
Yes, there is, but in reverse. Before it saves the data to the disk, it converts the Kokuso screen characters back to standard ASCII characters. That's American Standard Code for Information Interchange, which is just a fancy way of saying regular text characters that can be read by other programs and on other computers.
Right, so the saved file is compatible with other systems.
Exactly. Once it's written all the data to the disk, the write program closes the file and returns control to the basic loader.
So that's how you get your work off the Kokusio and onto something else.
Precisely.
Okay, let's get to the main event. What about the Eat It program, the heart of the Micro Works editor?
Yeah, this is where the real action happens. And the source material says it's more than just a basic editor, that it's a full-fledged menu-driven interface with tons of features.
More than just a basic editor.
Oh yeah, much more. I mean, it does the basic stuff like letting you enter and delete text, but it also has commands for moving around in your text, searching for words and phrases, doing global find and replace operations, even copying and moving entire blocks of text.
Wow, that's pretty impressive for an editor from the early 80s. It even has a jump command for quickly getting to different parts of your document, right?
It does. You can jump to the beginning of the file, the end of the file, or to the beginning of the file, and then immediately do a find or change operation, which is pretty handy.
And they managed to fit all this into the Coco's limited memory. That's pretty amazing.
It is. And there's this interesting point the author makes about the EDOT program. They think it might have been developed separately from the assembler part of the Micro Works editor.
That's intriguing. Why do they think that?
Well, there are a few clues. The way the editor and assembler handle what are called direct page variables is different. These are special memory locations that the processor can access very quickly. The editor puts these variables after its main code, while the assembler puts them before its code. Plus, the editor makes extensive use of those RAM hooks, but the assembler doesn't use them at all.
You keep mentioning these RAM hooks. Can you remind us what those are?
Oh yeah, sorry. These RAM hooks, there are 8 of them, and they basically act like predefined jump instructions to various utility functions within the editor. They're located in memory between 1B63 and 1B78.
Utility functions, like what?
So, for example, one of the hooks, EDVEC1, is used to display status information at the top of the screen, stuff like how much free RAM you have left. Another hook, EDVEC2, is for the page down functionality, letting you scroll down through your text. There are hooks for sending text to the screen, for calling the keyboard command handler, for making short delays, even for doing an undo to revert changes.
Wow, so it's like they built in these extension points so you could modify the editor's behavior without having to mess with the core code.
Exactly. It was a really clever way to make the editor more flexible and extensible.
Pretty forward thinking for the time.
Definitely.
And the deep dive goes into quite a bit of detail on how the editor handles user input using these things called input loops. Can you explain those a bit?
So every time you press a key on the keyboard, the editor has to figure out what to do with that input, right? It does this using these input loops. And it's actually tied to one of those RAM hooks we talked about, EDVEC5.
So the RAM hooks are involved here too.
Yep, they're all over the place. When you call EDVEC5, it jumps to a routine called KEYCMD, which is located at 0F8A in memory. What KEYCMD does is it takes the code representing the key you pressed, and it compares it against a list of valid characters for the current mode or command you're in.
So if you're in insert mode, for example, it's going to have a different set of valid characters than if you're in command mode.
Exactly. And if it finds a match, it executes the specific jump vector associated with that key. Basically, it jumps to the code that handles that particular key press.
So it's like a big lookup table that maps key presses to actions?
It is. And the structure of that table is really interesting. Immediately after the instruction that calls KEYCMD, there's this 2-byte space reserved for an instruction. This instruction will be executed after KEYCMD is finished. Then comes the list of character vector pairs.
So each pair tells the program what to do if a certain key is pressed.
Exactly. Each pair is 3 bytes long. The first byte is the ASCII code of the character, and the next 2 bytes are a memory address, a vector, pointing to the code that should be executed if that character is pressed. And this list is always terminated by a null byte, a byte with the value 0. That tells the program that it's reached the end of the list. Then finally, there's another 2-byte memory address, and that points to the code that should be executed if the pressed key didn't match any of the characters in the list. So it's like a default case.
It's like a well-organized filing system for keyboard input. And the disassembly gives us a good example of this with the text input loop, or TIE loop, which is at $114.
Right. TIE loop is a relatively simple one because it only handles a few basic input options. It's basically for entering regular text characters, and it also has an option for invoking the help command and options for accepting or aborting the input.
So it's a nice, simple example to illustrate how these input loops work. Now, the Micro Works Editor also has these different modes, each for specific tasks, like command mode, insert mode, line insert mode, exchange mode, and delete mode. Can you give us a quick overview of each mode and what you can do in them?
Sure. Command mode is kind of like the default state of the editor. You enter it at memory address 10C7 $. In command mode, you can move the cursor around using the arrow keys, you can jump to the beginning or end of the text that's on the screen, and you can initiate other editing modes and commands by pressing single keys. Like D will take you to delete mode, X to exchange mode, F to the find command, and so on. Pressing break will exit the editor entirely and take you back to the COSO's basic interpreter.
And what about insert mode and line insert mode? They both start at memory address $196.
So in insert mode, you can type in new text, and the editor will insert it at the cursor position, pushing the existing text to the right. In line insert mode, you can insert entire new lines of text. Pressing enter will start a new line, and the left arrow key will backspace, deleting the character to the left of the cursor.
And what does the right arrow key do in those modes?
That's interesting. The right arrow doesn't move the cursor forward by single space. Instead, it inserts a tab character, and that moves the cursor over to either column 8 or column 15 on the screen, which is commonly used to create indentation back in the day. Pressing break while in either of these modes will take you back to command mode without inserting anything.
So it's a clean getaway. What about exchange mode? It starts at 159 Bs, I believe.
Exchange mode is for replacing existing text. You move the cursor to the text you want to modify, and then you can just start typing. The new characters will overwrite the existing ones. Pressing Shift and the right arrow together will insert a space at the cursor position.
And what happens when you're done making changes in exchange mode?
You press Enter, and it accepts your changes and takes you back to command mode. If you decide you don't want to keep your changes, you press Break, and it will discard your changes and return you to command mode.
Makes sense. And finally, delete mode. It starts at $14B $5.
Delete mode is pretty straightforward. It lets you delete characters or whole lines of text. Pressing the right arrow will shift the text to the left, effectively deleting the character at the cursor. Pressing the down arrow will shift the entire line where the cursor is, and all the lines below it up by one line, essentially deleting the entire line.
Okay, so it's like cutting out a line of text.
Exactly. Pressing Enter will accept the deletions you've made, and pressing Break will cancel the deletions and return you to command mode.
Now, in addition to those editing modes, the Micro Works Editor also has 11 separate commands that you can invoke from command mode. Can you walk us through those quickly?
Of course. We've got find, backward find, symbol search, page forward, page backward, change, copy block, move block, jump, repeat last find or change, and help.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. Let's start with find.
Find, you trigger it by pressing F, and it's located in the code at $13.99. It searches for the first occurrence of a specific word or phrase, starting from the cursor position and moving down through the text. It is a literal mode that you can activate by starting your search term with a quote, and it supports basic wildcards.
Wildcards.
Yeah, you can use an inverted question mark, which you entered by pressing Shift and A to represent any single character. Backward find is similar, but it searches upward from the cursor position. You trigger it by pressing B, and it's at $1,320.
Makes sense. What about symbol search?
Symbol search, which you trigger by pressing S and it's at $13.08, is specifically for programmers. It searches for assembly language symbols, which are typically found at the beginning of lines of code. Page forward, triggered by N at $19FD, and page backward, triggered by P at $1A22, let you scroll through your text one screenful at a time.
Okay, so those commands are mostly about navigating through your text and finding things. What about the commands that actually let you modify the text?
Right. The change command, you trigger it with C, and it's at 12B1 as does a global find and replace operation. It's similar to the find command with the same literal and wildcard options. copy block, which you trigger with K.